Good afternoon, and welcome to Implementing Analytics and Technology to Support Value-Based Care, a health system CIO Media Inc. production. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. Send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 or 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Adam Carvel, VP, Data Management and Analytics with Fairview Health Services, Dr. Bradley Crotty, Chief Digital Engagement Officer with Froedtert Health, and Don Gray, Chief Enterprise Data and Analytics Officer with Mercy. And then we will have our Q&A, our audience Q&A. So let's jump right in. Adam, if you want to start us off by telling us a little bit about your organization and your role.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Adam Carvel. I'm the Vice President of Data, Technology, and Analytics for mHealth Fairview, which is the second largest system in the state of Minnesota behind Mayo Clinic. And we are associated with the University of Minnesota Medical Center. We have about 60 clinics and 10 hospitals, all within the state of Minnesota.
Very good. Brad?
Hi, nice to see everyone. Brad Crotty, and something said I serve as the Chief Digital Engagement Officer for Froedtert Medical College, Wisconsin. We're a academic community health system in eastern Wisconsin, 11 hospitals anchored by one academic health system that's the level 1 trauma center for Milwaukee metropolitan area in eastern Wisconsin. We have about 45 outpatient clinics. I also serve as the Chief Medical and Product Officer for a small company that's owned by the health system called Inception Health, which manages our digital portfolio. So nice to be here.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. Don?
My name is Don Gray. I run data and analytics for Mercy. Mercy is based out of St. Louis, Missouri. There are a lot of Mercy hospitals, so we're the one that is anchored in Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and a little bit in Kansas. We're a Catholic health system, about a $7 billion enterprise with many clinics and a large hospital system. So I joined about 18 months ago, and we're building out a large scale capability.
Very good, Don. Thank you. All right. Let's get into it. Adam, we're going to start with you. Describe some of the value-based care programs you've been involved with. Talk about the analytics that were required for participation. And did you need to change things at your health system in order to produce the analytics for those programs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So Fairview was one of the original 32 pioneer ACOs all the way back in, I think, 2010. And I was on board at that time. And we've continued in that history. So we've gone through Kidney Care Choices, we're through BPCI-A, currently working in direct contracting. And absolutely, we changed a ton of stuff. We stood up a whole team around value-based care analytics. We shifted our incentive models to be aligned with the external incentives of a value-based care economy. We built out analytics that previously didn't exist, for instance, primary care empanelment, right? Building complex algorithms to be able to say who truly is accountable for a patient's care. And so through all of those programs, we've matured from a point where we were kind of jumping in, thinking this is the right thing to do for our patients and our communities with that pioneer program 12 years ago, to now being really pragmatic and thoughtful about what our identity is and whether or not we can be successful. And a lot of that is on the back of good analytics and understanding our patient populations.
Very good, Brad.
So there's a couple that I'd be happy to talk about and weave through our conversation. So many of our digital programs, actually, I think all of our digital programs are under some value-based care arrangements, meaning that we have avoided doing a sort of a fee-for-service or using some of the CPT codes for remote patient monitoring because we feel like the puck is moving towards the value-based care arrangement, and we want to meet our patients in that environment and find the most efficient way, the most scalable way to make sure that people's needs are being met. So we've had, several from our mental health program. COVID remote patient monitoring was one that we did across all of the patients that tested positive within our health network, regardless of what insurance you had or whether you were one of our ACO patients or clinically integrated patients or not. It helped us manage our bed capacity. It helped us maintain relationships with people without needing to basically bring them into waiting rooms. And through all of that, when we kind of look at the value and ask questions, is it worth it to provide a pulse oximeter? Is it worth it to provide this service to all those people? Everyone wants to know what's the ROI, right? What's the ROI for all of that, particularly if you're not billing along the way individual CPT codes. We have to be able to articulate that, and analytics is part of that story. What I would love to talk about, through this panel is how you actually get the data cleaned, massaged, and you really bring the right tools and talent to answer some of those problems, because in many ways it's not a simple Excel spreadsheet anymore. It's a more sophisticated analysis that we need to do to actually drive these business decisions. We have others that I'd be happy to talk about along the way, including our diabetes management program, and share a little bit about how we've done the ROI and calculations on those programs as well. Those are payer specific, but we've increasingly been enrolling more patients across our health network in those and expanding the eligibility. So driven by, what we find in the numbers. So happy to talk more and look forward to it.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. Don?
So I would say that, I walked into a situation where a strategic decision had been made for, a 5-year and a 10-year strategy that sees the future very much moving to value-based care. And I'm sure everybody is on the same boat. But, I would say one of the challenges about the analytics required is that it's not a unique population that only handles themselves in a value-based care scenario. So in a large system, early on, I was trying to suggest, look, we need an integrated platform that can manage our patients as they come in and out of different care models, because some people don't get to control that. It's whatever insurance gets offered wherever they're working. And so how do we go about that? One of the things that we had to do to produce the data was we decided to come up with a unified consumer record that would be consistent across all forms of people within our care. So it had to address everything that we needed to be able to do with value-based care, but it also had to work in a fee-for-service environment as well. We wanted, on the value-based care, we had to find a good partner to bring in for social determinants of health. We wanted to have a better comprehensive view of the person, because oftentimes their reasons for coming into the system are items that would not be considered traditional healthcare items. It could be there could be a food issue, there could be a housing issue, lots and lots of issues. So we began to look at those types of data gaps that we felt that we might have. And then so there was some new data, and we also created a unified or universal provider record, which was a lot of work, right? To kind of say, we have people with panels for value-based care patients. They've also got fee-for-service patients. They've got various different types of value-based arrangements. How do we manage this provider data in a way that will work across all of those things, so that, again, it can be seamless in the patient experience? And one of the big programs that we launched, my team created algorithms to predict a diabetic event, let's call it. And we've worked with, we have a patient experience team. We worked with them where when certain lab results come in, it triggers a set of activities. and it happens in a very automated fashion in cooperation with the care physicians. Defining panels, all the things everybody else talked about, very much needed to happen. There were a lot of panel definitions that were floating around, similar-ish, but everybody's got different numbers, and it was creating a lot of confusion. So, we had to do all of those sort of basic elements, and we incorporated those into what we're calling a unified consumer record. So those are some of the activities we had to do.
Very good. Brad, do you find that there's a relationship between what the hospital or the health system's doing and the programs, and they influence each other? So for example, you may be collecting certain data and metrics, but then somebody discovers a new VBC program and that wants specific information in a specific way. Okay, well, if it's compelling enough that we want to participate, we need to produce that metric. And it goes both ways. So the health system may produce things that it thinks are of value, but then it also winds up producing things for specific programs it wants to participate in. And that, both those things impact each other.
No, that is true, to the extent that we can, have the world, come together and harmonize, but at least particularly our payer network around, certain, key definitions, then great. But we've had to invest in doing a lot of mapping across the different terms, and we've put in products to help us manage our data and data governance, because many of them are tied to downstream systems, and you're always wondering who's included in this numerator and who's included in this denominator, and do you have the right data? And unfortunately, it just requires more staff time to manage this. I think at a leadership level, we need to continue to try to figure out what matters and drive people, towards that. We've had a couple of examples where we have we've been able to get more of our local payers to kind of see the world, or how we have, particularly around some chronic disease management program. For example, our diabetes program that I mentioned, that we expanded eligibility in partnership with one of our payers and we're able to work with. But for the most part, it's a lot of data mapping. When it comes to the consumer experience, like all of us, probably had an experience where you're going into the doctor's office and you fill out like 90% of the information is exactly the same, and then 10% is like something a little bit different that clinic or that program needs to know about, and then as a result, usually it's a paper form, but you're sort of given the whole list to fill out, and you say, listen, this about me, or some of my patients do. They just cross it off and they see, in
No
in
change.
Epic, in the
whatever.
EHR, in Epic, right? So we're like, we've had to put in, a fair amount of sort of process and then governance around the process to get kind of the right data intake from patients. Like, what are we actually going to ask patients? And in this sort of consumer-driven era, which is really important to us, like, how can the experience not be miserable,
Right,
for people who have to fill out all these forms? So we've tried to come up with like a very modular way of doing it, where there's sort of a base level of information that we need for, you have key demographics, and then you have social determinants of health that are going to feed many of our downstream systems. And then you have what's relevant to that clinical data picture. And then within that, you will be able to add in particular questions. So if specialty X is participating in an outcomes-based assessment of the Center of Excellence, and they need a particular patient-reported outcome measure, let's include that in, but let's not make the whole experience about that. Let's figure out how to make it modular. To actually get everyone on the same page, we really had to basically start from scratch. We gathered I have a picture on my desk of all the forms that are this high in the healthcare system. In the thousands of forms, we had a team go through them and then put some structure around it. What do we need out of everybody? So let's agree on these. We need these for all to kind of run the business and to take care of people. And then what do we need to fill in the population health metrics? And then we use the our foundation EHR system as much as we can. And then we meet other program requirements, but we try to do as much standard build as we can, and then add on that these other little modular things if we need it for a particular program reporting or some other regulatory obligation. We run that process through our data team to make sure that we're not asking that question in some other form or some other data structure that is basically identical. And if it's not identical, but it's close enough, we have that's a conversation about can it be, or do we really, really, really need it to be this other way for something that's some immovable measure. And then it goes through our pop health that does all of our reporting for our value-based care arrangement. It goes through any legal risk compliance review, if that's relevant to the metric. It goes through quality because they may have other quality. And then also goes through a small filter for, patient experience and language. Is this to the extent that it's not a standard question, is there any way that we can phrase it to be better understood without losing meaning of the metric? And then after that, we put it in and tie it in. So I'm sure the folks on this webinar understand, it's a lot of process. It's a lot of reminding people that there's a lot of work, but we have to make the experience easier for people. We have to make the experience easier for our staff. And we have to set ourselves up for to be a learning health system and to use data to drive decisions. And so those are kind of the high level things we try to appeal to people, but there's a lot of devil in those details.
Adam, it's interesting what Brad was saying. It all starts with the consumerism approach in terms of what you're collecting from the patient, and it starts with respecting their wishes and the fact that we know none of us want that booklet of papers on a clipboard being handed to us, and it just makes you so angry. Really, it really does. It makes me angry. It's just it's the last thing you want to do, especially if you feel like they have it already or they should have it or something like that. But the original question was about that back and forth relationship between the health system and the programs and how they can impact and sort of feed off each other. And then there's the consumerism idea, or anything else that Brad said you want to comment on. I'll leave it wide open for you.
Sure. Yeah, I think Brad hit on a lot of key pain points, right? Which are not only are the files and formats we get from these various value-based contracts different, but then the way we are required to collect information to participate in them, how we engage with our consumers is also very different. The things that one value-based arrangement might require are generally quite different. And so Fairview has taken a very similar approach to what Dr. Crotty said, with kind of a layered, fragmented approach where we say this is germane to this population, and we're going to collect these sets of data variables there. And so I think we're really similar in that regard. I will say, we have an incredible relationship with our payer relations department, and so we have worked really hard with them building out a standardized data model for both data that comes to us from our value-based arrangements that are retrospective, right? So when we get claims data, transactional data back from a payer, we ask for the same set of data elements at an encounter, a transaction, and a patient level over and over again. Now, we don't always get it, but it's been really instrumental in helping us build out kind of a warehouse of a longitudinal view of a patient. That is then, of course, just like Brad said, it's then buttressed with this information that is so much richer that comes from our EHR, where we're collecting patient outcomes, we're collecting the remote patient monitoring data, and then we're bolting it on to create a more holistic view of that patient or consumer. And I would say the final step that I would even comment on is we then share some of that information back, of course, with consent of our patients. We share some of that back to the insurance companies because they are able to help us identify gaps that may have been closed by a site outside of my EMR's purview, or identify additional programs that the insurance company might be offering that could benefit from or help us solve a gap that a value-based patient has. So it's kind of a holistic picture of this consumer, and we're trying to plug in, just like Brad said, individual components, individual value-added data points that help us, keep our communities and our patients healthier.
Very good, Don. It sounds like one of the big issues here is health systems trying to participate in multiple programs, and if each program wants things in a different way or a different piece of data. Brad talked about mapping and all that kind of thing. You roll with large health systems, especially you, Don, with Mercy. You talk about having good relationships with the payers. Is there some negotiation there that says, hey, I understand you want this or you want this way, but we have 7 other programs we're participating in where we do it one way, and I'm not sure we want to be in your program if we have to do it that way, your way. Is there some of that? Because ideally, again, things are standardized and uniform, and the data is the data, and whoever wants it, whatever program, that it should be easier for the health systems. Your thoughts?
I have a business partner on the senior leadership team that is managing the payer relationships. So, I'm certainly not in a position to say, I don't think it's worth the trouble.
Right.
Right.
You just have to execute on it, right?
Yeah, we have to execute. I think this has been a very elusive challenge. I think within healthcare is standardized kind of data exchange formats. We do try, right, and we do provide feedback. We are getting better as a team of providing very specific information to the folks managing payer relationships about, if we have issues with completeness or inconsistencies, right? We've been working to make it easier for them to help us, right, with the payer partners, and because it is a give and take relationship. I know we're going to talk a little later about the 21st Century Cures Care Act, excuse me, and that has promise. It's undoubtedly, like any new program, going to take time before it really flushes itself out. I'm sort of assuming if the deadline's this December, maybe by the following December, it becomes a little more helpful. And I think it's cause for optimism, at least. I think it provides a forum to create standards that I think has been missing.
All right, very good. Let's go to the next question. It's a kind of an interesting one here. Brad, we'll start with you. How do you know if your data is good enough or if your data program is mature enough to participate in a value-based care program? It's just an interesting concept because, I've talked to chief information officers and those involved with data, and a lot of them don't think the data is that great that they have. So if your organization wants to participate in a program, I wonder if it ever happens that the individual in charge of the data says, well, we're not sitting on some great stuff over here. So maybe you want to give me a year, right? Maybe you want to give me some time to see if I can clean this stuff up because it's a mess. So could you ever have a situation where the individual in charge of data is kind of like pushing back or asking for more time? And I just wonder if that happens. Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're in a sort of position where, do you put 1 foot in, do you put 2 feet into these programs, and then you're starting the journey. So in my experience sort of with, 2 systems over the last decade, making these choices, it's been more of the business decision that we need to move this way, and then we have to have the data to support it. My prior system that I worked at was also a Pioneer ACO member, and we had, it was still pretty early days in terms of panel management. We actually it was a self-developed EHR system, so really all of the data our team managed and curated, but making that decision, then led to a lot of other downstream investments in getting the data right. Yeah, you sort of worry that if you say like, oh, I'm worried about the data, you'll be sitting around for a long time and never really join any of these programs. You could always make the data better. You could always enrich it with getting additional data from other sources. You could always enrich it from claims, you know, et cetera. But that's my take on it. Interested in others.
So Don, based on what Brad says, it would be reasonable to say, okay, if we're going to go into these programs, you know, let's say you're the head data person, if we're going to go into these programs, I'm really going to need some investment because I want to get the data better. We need to get the data better. We can't go in without additional investments in our data ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense. One example on our side was, you know, there was a big push based on our mission and our sort of our approach to patient care that, you know, the door is open for everybody, right? So the social determinants of health became a very hot topic, and you know, the program wanted to launch, and it wanted to launch, and they said we're going to capture this data in the moment, and that's a tough way to do it, right? And I said I don't think we can. I don't think we're going to successfully launch at scale. We need a partner that's already done a lot of this footwork, and so we were able to prevail, and it was not a big investment amount, you know, for the data. I've had it outside of, you know, I've been in other industries, and I've delayed the launch of products for a big company because the data wasn't in good enough shape, and that's a bad day. That's a bad meeting. It was like I'd been there 5 weeks. That was the first time I had to go to the executive committee, right? And I had to tell them, you're going to have to delay this very large revenue stream because of these reasons. And we're going to put something in the market that isn't good enough, right? That's easier, actually, because it's so obvious and it's right on the table. Most of our stuff, it's a piece of a bigger thing. So you don't have that big lever that you can pull. So, you know, the way that I've gone about it, and I won't speak for the other panelists, is you just have to articulate the kinds of things that are going to happen as a result of it, and not exaggerate them, and just try to be frank about it. And then it's a decision amongst a number of folks, right, that are involved with the program to say, is that acceptable or not acceptable to us? And we're large, right? We're a large $7 billion system, but it wasn't so many years ago where it was just over 30 hospitals operating independently. So most of the people here aren't used to it being this big system. So the systemic conversations, I try to come into them with that in mind and articulate the kind of things and the scale to which it can create a problem. And I try to be honest about what could we clean up later, and where are we possibly kidding ourselves, right? That we won't be able to chase after this thing with the amount of people we have and the amount of facilities we have. And just it's all you can do is be frank, and as data people, we have to bring the data forward, of course, to articulate the cause. And you know, I personally haven't experienced that so much on the clinical side. Our clinical partners they're very conscientious, right, about the information they're using for care. I mean, I usually find it's in other areas. I haven't had any trouble with anybody really trying to push the boundaries around the data that's most closely associated with patient care.
That's very interesting, Adam. I just, you know, I want to help people in your position at other health systems, and I wonder if this is a common dynamic going on out there, where the individuals in your positions want to make sure the organization is getting into programs where it can produce metrics that are of quality, and there may be behind the scenes conversations that need to happen about either, okay, we'll do it, but here's what we need, or maybe we need to wait, Don mentioned a situation where he, put a hold on something. I think it was with another company, Don. And you said, we were not going forward with this. And that's really courageous to do that. And I'm sure you don't regret it. I'm
It was,
sure you
it was less scary than the alternative.
less scary than, but it doesn't make you popular at that moment. They might say, hey, who hired this guy and how quickly can we get rid of him? Right. So, but still, the alternative, right, is to have it out there and crash and burn. So Adam, your thoughts around this dynamic and the head of data and analytics having to have tough conversations and get things more in line where they think they need to be.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll try to touch on that and also get back to some of the program assessment aspects of this question. I look at data as an illumination tool, right? It helps us understand what our gaps are, where our problems are, and then we partner with operators to make the best decision for our organization, partner with the appropriate stakeholders on strategy, and then we use that data when it's compelling to help shape those decisions. So that presents some really unique challenges in population health. The one I'll start with is program efficacy. But let me take actually half a step back and talk about Fairview's journey. So when we jumped into the Pioneer ACO program, we didn't really know what metrics we were going to need, right? A CMS told us, here's the quality metrics you're going to be participating in, but we didn't know what that translated to from an operation standpoint. What leading and lagging indicators did we need to be able to ensure success in those programs? So we started with just kind of this aspirational goal, right? Healthcare is very consumer focused. Providers and leadership generally want to help patients. And so we jumped into this not knowing exactly what we needed. And now through 12 years worth of good data management, understanding the transiency of patients, right? Jumping from one insurance plan to another based on their employment group. With that experience over the last decade, Fairview has gotten to a point where we're evaluating programs, not only retrospectively to determine how well we think we were doing based on the data we had, which again, our EMR is incomplete. It's about, somewhere between 60 and 80% of what the actual payer knows about it. We don't have great data on some of the PBM aspects. We don't have great data on some of the care that happens outside of our system until later on in those contracts. But we've been able to build some forecasts and some models that have allowed us to say, based on what we do know and quantifying what we don't know, here's how we think we can be successful. And that's all come on the backs of looking retrospectively at the programs we participated in and saying, gosh, in Q3 of this program for Kidney Care Choices, I really expected to see a payout of X, and I didn't. And once I got the complete data set from our payers, I was able to identify where my blind spot was and then control it. And to speak a little more in specifics about controlling that blind spot, we've shifted a lot of our investment to HIEs and to making sure that we're using that more contemporaneous information, alerts for admits, discharges, and transfers, right? Negotiating with payers to get data explicitly much, much faster. We've started to pull those in and look at them directly in those more holistic data sets like the claims data we get from our payers. And once we've got that, I'll call it mostly complete picture and relatively quickly, we're able to turn around and then say, are we going to be successful in this program? And then what is it about the program maybe midway through where we're not as performant as we'd like to be, and how can we shift that accordingly? So we're using data in ways 12 years later that we never would have foreseen when we started getting into the value-based care arrangements. And it allows us to be more thoughtful and predictive about the next ones that we join.
Very good. Excellent. All right. Next question. Brad, let's start with you. Participating in value-based care requires a lot of data sharing. And the 21st Century Cures Act has deadlines that will require more data sharing. So I know you're not CISOs on the line, but how can health systems prepare to meet those regulations without running afoul of Hipaa or data blocking prohibitions?
Yeah, it's a complex question. What I find the most complex aspect of this is just the uncertainty of the regulations and the interpretation of them. What is information blocking and the like. I guess the way that we're thinking about it is, how can we make our system and our tools, our APIs, our portals, our data, bulk fire and otherwise, is to kind of do more sharing. How can we make sure that we enable them to really do what we need for clinical care and what's right for the for the patient? And so if we're transferring data for VBC purposes, and we have a clear established clinical operation and business need, I'm less worried about HIPAA in that regard, and more just clear that we make sure that if you have a right to that data, that we make it available, but we make sure that we're sending it to the right place, et cetera. It's what I find around this sort of information blocking and how to manage this is, I think that my perception of this is that the EHR vendors and systems are really worked up trying to figure out how they can best support their clients, and then their clients, those of us in the health informatics and information technology community are then trying to figure out if that's the right path, and we should take the suggested configurations, if we need to do something different, if we're interpreting everything the same way. I can just share that the way that we, in terms of how that's a question of like, how can systems prepare to meet those regulations? I can say is, the process that we follow, which I'm sure that many others are following, is getting external legal opinions, looking at all of the data where there are connections that we have, what do we need to turn on, getting the opinion of security, getting the opinion of, or sort of the business cases that are needed around the population health programs, et cetera, and those who manage those, and then pulling those pieces together and finding an approach that is I think defensible from an by managing this sort of information blocking balance that's gonna be created. If there's a more specific program, we could kind of dive more into it. There's a lot of the Cures Act, which I think has a lot of people, again, sort of like hairs on end, like how are you going to interpret this, but I still think it's like HIPAA enabled people to do right by the patient, right? We know that there's people would hide behind HIPAA and say, oh, you don't have access to that, or I can't give that to you. But if you have a legitimate business need, all of this is saying is like, you can't hide behind it anymore. Find a way to make it work and do it. And it's really, again, going to what's right for the patient.
Very good. Adam?
Yeah, very similar to what Brad said. So we have at Fairview, we have a robust data information stewardship council that includes members of our legal team, members of our compliance team, of course, our information security teams, our CISOs. And on that committee, we have established data categorizations, right? PHI, business confidential, completely confidential, et cetera. And we tag all, hundreds of thousands of data elements in our system with these categorizations. And then we operate on a principle of least access needed, right? And that goes for developers who work in my area, as well as clinicians who are seeing it. And we try to live that out each and every day of just making sure that we have the minimum viable access, but still using data and the information in our system to drive the best outcomes for patients. And so between sort of those process steps that we've put in place, I'm a little less concerned than I think some of the areas that aren't as mature in that data stewardship and data governance arena. We've been at it for years now, and of course nothing is perfect. We're always tweaking it, but we've got a pretty good handle on what goes in and out of our doors, and we keep a pretty close eye on it.
Very good. Don?
Yeah, pretty much the same. We're leveraging the data governance instruments and organizations that have been put in place. We did avail ourselves of an expert third party to come in and sort of take an independent view. And we're a big Epic shop, and there's a pretty complicated and robust process that those big AHRs are going through to get compliant, to be certified as compliant with this act. So we're definitely counting on that as well. We've also entered into a strategic partnership quite recently with the Mayo Clinic, and as part of that, we're creating we're going to create another cloud environment of de-identified data. We're not yet sure how else we're going to leverage that, and whether that will be specifically helpful for this particular challenge or not. It's too early days, but there are some pretty sophisticated de-identification capabilities that are just coming into the market now that are really interesting. Yeah, the vendor didn't, I don't think, appreciated my comment. I said, well, if that actually works, I'm going to be excited. He said, what do you mean? I said, I think you know what I mean. I mean, it's a pitch is one thing, and bringing it into the dirty environment of a real world scenario is quite another. But I'm optimistic that some of these really advanced technology applications are really starting to get at this issue, where it isn't so simple as blocking a few fields, right? There's more to it, because there are people out there that might have bad intent and might be good at re-identifying data. So I'm also I'm rooting for that venture community, that they're going to make some advances in the next couple of years.
All right, very good. We have an audience question. Looks like it's for you, Adam. Amazing predictive modeling of things outside your care network, Adam. HIEs make a ton of sense in this context. What was the key to your data science approach in leveraging these assets?
Yeah, so a lot of it was just based on making sure that we had financial success. So we were starting to, we started with what we did know, and then we started bolting in individual variables until we found things that had enough positive predictive value for us to say, that's a data element that needs to be part of these models. And it's very much piece by piece, but we had some really great subject matter experts that kind of had ideas in that space, and also a few folks that engaged with vendors and were able to say, what are you doing in this space? Because healthcare, at least the provider area, in my opinion, we're a little ways behind the Optums and some of the other for-profit, data shops in the country and in the world. And so we wanted to take advantage of some of the expertise that they have. And so while we built most of the models ourselves, especially with respect to finance, we did look at what they were collecting and ask them to come in and help us assess some of those for fit.
All right, very good. We're going to move to our Ask a Co-Panelist segment, which I love. Adam, I'm going to give you the first opportunity. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I'll throw it out to both of them. And my question is, what current or upcoming piece of technology do you think has the most import in controlling and either creating good patient outcomes or controlling value-based care costs?
Brad?
Wait, can I answer the other question, which is what do I think will not? What's a piece of technology that will
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that we need is good data. And one of the things that I kind of get excited about is how we can get better data on the front end without inhibiting workflow of people trying to do their jobs. We're trying to put some of this data on patients where it's appropriate and where they're able to participate in providing data, so we can kind of get the best sense of the context that they're living in, and that helps with segmentation then. And then if we have them with segmentation, then we can actually use some of the tools and the data to personalize how we interact with them, and then we in theory start to change the trajectory of their care in a way that we know right now, if we just do blanket campaigns for X, Y, and Z preventive condition or post-ED outreach, that we're not really hitting the mark as well as if we really individualize that. So I think that that's an area that we need to grow in. Was the tools that, on the flip side of, there are several tools that help manage, data on the clinical side. Is this, does this person really have this condition, or and there are alerts and things. And my just encouragement for all of us is to actually really look at these tools, test them out, and then make sure they're not interfering with clinical workflow, because there may be other algorithms or other ways that we could do to flag when a person may have a diagnosis that's not coded, or has a diagnosis that we think is a false positive that we need to clean out of the data, rather than putting it on the backs of our clinicians that are kind of trying to survive an even busier day.
Mm-hmm.
Don?
So I'll do a near term and midterm. I think in the near term, I'm most excited about process mining and applying the concepts of process mining to healthcare data, to be able to derive patient-specific care paths. And, we have, at Mercy, we have 15 years of transactional data, lab data, all sorts of data. It's just a mountain of data. And what I've told our head of our hospitals, I said, look, what I want to create for you is another person at your table that is 15 years and 5,000 physicians worth of insights, right? That you can leverage, that no individual physician could possibly be exposed to all of these things. We're at a point where we're ready to do a limited production test on that type of capability, where when somebody comes in, they get an initial diagnosis, we have their health history. How do we bring those things together to say the odds are X% that they're going to need these ancillary services, and that if we follow this path that has the lowest readmission rate, the lowest mortality rate, it's very exciting. The midterm one that it's hard not to get excited about is the intersection of value-based care with precision medicine that could be possible through various advanced genetic testing. And everybody uses the same equipment. There's different companies out there. They're putting different wrappers around it, but there's a tremendous amount of optimism that they're all using the same equipment to really get at the core. And they're all figuring out, well, what is useless exhaust and what is useful exhaust, because it creates, even in a big data world, it is a crazy pile of data, right? That comes out of it. So the science of figuring out which stuff matters really is going to be so exciting. And but that it does feel that that's just still a little beyond the tips of our fingers, right? So
Excellent. Very good. Brad, did you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I'd love both of your takes on how you build a data culture within your organizations, going everywhere from top executive leaders all the way through all staff, and then with that is sort of a leading question of maybe, which is how much do you insource versus outsource your data and analytics capabilities?
Don, let's start with you.
this has been a hot issue since I got here. They were outsourcing the vast majority of it. And the problem was I couldn't find anybody inside who would explain to me the results that people were walking around and handing to people. And I'm like, this is no good. So we're starting to insource more. But it is, you want to be able to leverage the collective intelligence. So, we are looking, and I'm actively exploring, and I'd be happy to go offline on this because it's a pretty complicated subject, collaboration forums, right? Where we can openly share. Nobody comes into this industry that doesn't want to help people, I don't think. And so I think that's a big opportunity, because if people read this and they hear this and they hear that, but we're trying to get enough capability inside, right? Where we can not just produce the insights, but really explain to people at a level of depth and confidence, what we know, how sure we are, and if we're unsure, because they say, well, these people say they've got something that's this accurate. I said, we're telling you the same thing, but we're also telling you everything else, false positives and all sorts of things, right? I said, they have all those issues too. They're just not selling that part of it, right? So, so that it's a tricky balance. You want curiosity, but and create a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah, great questions. So we have a small but mighty analytics education group that focuses on data literacy, and at the executive level, I consider it my accountability to make sure that and I'm fortunate to have a quite data-driven culture, but it's my accountability to make sure that my executive peers know how to interpret data. And that they're consuming safe and reasonable data. And we do that through that data literacy. We also have a seal of approval. So Don, to address that issue of people seeing different spreadsheets with different numbers on it, we have one that is our analytics seal of excellence. That means that the terms are governed, that they've been measured, that they're approved by our Data Information Stewardship Council, that we take into account upgrades, all of these other pieces. And that's helped build that culture of literacy. But I'll be candid, for an organization like Fairview with 33,000 people, 20,000 plus of whom are providing direct patient care, data literacy isn't at the forefront of their job duties. And so we try to make it fun. We try to come up with games and quizzes that make thinking critically about data in your day-to-day life rewarding. And then with respect to insourcing versus outsourcing, I'm always looking for the cheapest labor footprint, but I'm looking at it with qualitative variables of return on investment as well. So while I can find some pretty cheap labor footprint to be able to bang out code, that initial idea of consulting with the service line executives and understanding their needs, interpreting them from a data lens, and then building that out, we are generally continuing to build that kind of institutional wisdom in-house. And then we partner with our global partners to make sure that we're delivering content that is scalable, sustainable, and reusable. And so we use a combination of both.
All right, Don, I don't think we're going to have time for your question to your co-panelists, so I apologize for that. I think we're going to have to move to final thoughts. So the way I want to couch this or sort of set it up is, picture you're giving your best advice to someone at a comparable sized organization in a comparable position. Based on your experience, your work, and your career, what's your best piece of advice to that individual as to how they can help execute on what their job is? Brad, we're going to start with you.
I would offer this is that, and that's to consider data as a product that you have, you maintain, and that you use. You have internal customers, and you start to really make sure that your product meets the needs of your customers, and you're continually trying to make it better, cheaper to produce, to Adam's point, and the like. So that's a concept that I would leave people with.
That's very good. It probably helps create a lot of strategies when you think of it that way. Don?
I would say, keep doing the hard work to articulate a compelling vision of the future that is data and analytics driven. And I've been at networking breakfasts for people who do the kind of work we do. And I was at one a few years back, and the person was complaining that nobody's interested in their work. And I said, well, maybe your work isn't very interesting. And I said, it's hard to make some of the stuff we have to do interesting and exciting. And, it can be a little bit frustrating, but you gotta keep on it. I ask myself every week, did I come up? Is there anything interesting? How interesting is it to others? Is there a way to make it more interesting? Because that's on us. We can't count on anybody else to try to tell our story. We have to find ways to do it.
Yeah, makes me think of when I speak to CISOs, it's they want to be connected to the patient care mission. So patient safety, right? Security is patient safety. So connecting everything to outcomes, patient outcomes, is usually a helpful way to go. But very good point there, Don. Adam, we're going to give you the final word.
Sure, I would say focus on balance, right? There's going to be things you're going to have to do quickly, but you're also going to want to come back around and make sure that you resolve the technical debt that doing things quickly often creates. to your point, Anthony, focus on the balance between better patient outcomes and considering data as a strategic asset to your business that costs money and requires care and feeding. And I think if you're continually trying to balance those aspects of both moving fast and getting things done with building something that is sustainable and future worthy, that you're going to end up in a pretty good spot. It took us a long time to learn that lesson, and we're continually revisiting it, but we're getting pretty good at it.
Wow, lots of great stuff there. So much stuff for people to take away and I think help them do their jobs a little better. Regarding continuing education, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll receive an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to register for upcoming panels. So with that, I want to thank our panel very much, Adam Carvel, Dr. Brad Crotty, and Don Gray, and I want to thank you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.